well. So this series of webinars is called Recipes for Recovery. This session is the first of a three-part series. We're going to kind of explore within it workable models for natural capital projects, nature restoration projects that leverage private investment to address the ecological challenges of nature restoration at landscape scale. So going to be learning about business models, implementation mechanisms, and those really sort of practical tips that enable strategic landscape restoration to function. We are exploring the recipes for recovery by visiting a number of case studies, and those are going to sort of highlight the models and mechanisms, and hopefully those provide some learnings for things that are transferable elsewhere. So series is co-hosted by the Scottish Forum. Many thanks to Sally for support on organising this, and then it's co-organised by the Centre for Sustainable Forests and Landscapes at the University of Edinburgh, and by the Integrating Finance and Biodiversity Programme, which supports my and Julia McCarthy's academic work, and many thanks to Julia for designing and organising this series. So this session is going to explore landscape enterprise networks, also known as LENS, and it's going to be celebrating the recent launch of the Leave and Lens project here in Scotland. We're joined by Tom Brown, who's the Senior Programme Manager for LensCo, and Amelia Heath, who's Director at Forth Rivers Trust. Sally will update us right at the end on the other events in this series at the end of the Q&A, and Amelia and Tom will introduce themselves once they get going. A reminder quickly before they jump in. The Scottish Forum has active hubs. These are led by volunteers, and they bring together really focused interest around sustainable land management for natural capital, marine natural capital, and digital enablers which support natural capital projects and markets. And then, of course, there's the Scottish Nature Finance Pioneers Hub, which most of us are all members of as well, but do join the others if they're of interest. So we're celebrating that, and then we're also celebrating the seed funding that we've seen come to Scotland over the past couple of years from public, philanthropic and private purses. And these case study stories come from those seed funding opportunities. We've been able to pilot, and then we've been able to now share the learnings from those pilots. So we've seen the Scottish Marine Environment Enhancement Fund, SMEF, bring £4 million worth of investment to seas and coast projects. And then the Facility for Investment Readiness in Nature in Scotland, Ferns, has channeled almost £6 million now of Scottish Government and National Lottery funding towards projects which are exploring business models, contracts, operational management plans, and so on. So the project we're hearing about today is a Ferns grant recipient, and I'm going to hand over to them, Amelia and Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. Let me take over screen share here.
Yep, sorry, I'll stop. There we go, thanks.
Yep, thanks everyone for being here. I'm Tom Brown. I'm the Senior Programme Manager for LENS in Scotland. So along with Amelia and the Forth Rivers Trust, I project manage our ongoing work in the Leven. And also I'm looking to set up lenses in the Borders, working with Tweed Forum, and Speyside, working with the Spey Catchment Initiative. I previously worked for 3Keel, which is Lens's sister consultancy in climate adaptation and mitigation work with a focus on agriculture and food supply chains. So thanks for your time today, and I'll pass over to Amelia.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks to Hannah, and thanks to Sally and Julia as well. It's nice to be with everybody today. Thank you for your time. Amelia Heath, Director at Forth Rivers Trust. I'll say more about Forth Rivers Trust in my part of the presentation, but just a bit by way of background, I come to this position from a background. I was previously the Trust's finance manager, and then got into project development and project management as part of that. So I've been with Forth Rivers Trust 8 years now. And yeah, looking forward to the presentation.
Thanks, Amelia. So today we'll give you an intro to Lens, kind of what the model is, how it works, and importantly, some of the kind of challenges we face setting a project like this up in Scotland, and some of the benefits of the collaborative approach we take. I'll then give you a brief intro to Lens in Scotland. So 2025 was our first year actually delivering money to farmers, but we've had ongoing projects in Scotland over the last 3 years. And then I'll pass over to Amelia to go into more depth on the Leven Lens and how we got that project off the ground. And then we'll go on to future potential, you know, what we think we can achieve if models like Lens are scaled across Scotland. And yeah, please do pop questions in the chat as we go, and we can come back to them at the end.
In the Q&A.
Q&A. And just to set the scene here, I won't dwell too long on these slides. I'm sure everyone will be reasonably familiar with this, but you know, we face a serious problem of extreme weather events, pest and disease, and degraded soils causing impacts such as crop yield decreases, water pollution, flooding, water scarcity, etc. And these impacts are happening as acutely in Scotland as they are elsewhere. So I think we've had our driest spring in 60 years, followed by our hottest summer, having massive water scarcity across much of the East Coast, and obviously big impacts there on Scottish farmers in terms of crops struggling to hit molting specifications, abstraction licenses being withdrawn, etc. This is also having big impacts on the businesses that rely on the landscape. So here are 3 businesses that are involved in Lens. I'll just zoom in on Diageo in the center there. And part of their motivation for being involved in Lens was their farmers facing impacts from these climate events. So malting barley struggling to hit malting specifications, and also abstraction licenses for their distilleries being halted. And that's all obviously against the backdrop of net zero targets, regenerative agriculture targets, etc. So how do we deal with these problems? Well, at Lens, we see regenerative agriculture as a key solution. Studies such as this one for the European Alliance for Regenerative Agriculture are showing that in the face of extreme weather events, farms that have implemented regenerative practices are showing higher productivity, higher gross margins, and in the long term, equivalent yields, and importantly, more stable yields when faced with a volatile climate. But obviously, the transition to regenerative agriculture has many barriers. These are both economic in terms of, you know, upfront cost of implementing measures, potential initial yield decline, limited access to finance, limited risk sharing, so farmers bearing the brunt of the risk with the transition, and the lack of incentives, so a shifting policy environment, uncertainty there, but also operational and social barriers, so limited farm data and metrics, limited access to inputs, tools and technologies, and an uncertain return on investment. So as we'll come on to, but we try and address these barriers quite holistically, both by, you know, providing finance in terms of overcoming those economic barriers, but also thinking more holistically about how we achieve the kind of social and operational changes as well. How then for organizations best to engage in regenerative agriculture? Well, that's where Lens and other collaborative finance models come in. So we bring organizations together who have a shared interest in a landscape to co-fund regenerative agriculture and drive that regional landscape resilience. So it's quite a proven model. We've delivered around 20 million in funding to farmers since 2021 across 350 farms and 80,000 hectares. and achieved around 50,000 tons of carbon emissions reductions and removals. I'll come on to it in a second, but I think what's really key with these collaborative models in terms of getting as many different organizations involved as possible is we try to look beyond just carbon. So looking at soil, water, biodiversity, and increasingly those community benefits as well. We have lenses in Poland, Hungary, Italy, east of England, Yorkshire, and the Leven. And as you can see, we're trying to set up projects elsewhere in Europe. But importantly, we try and make each lens really place-based. So we work with partners like Forth Rivers Trust to make sure we're meeting local environmental challenges. We also work with a wide variety of organizations, so from some of the largest food and drinks companies in the world through to utility companies, through to local councils. So it's a real broad church in terms of who's involved. As I say, we try to look beyond just carbon. So we measure, pesticide usage, nitrogen usage, soil organic carbon increases, and biodiversity indicators. And you can see some of the impact that our work has had between 2023 and 2024 there. I would point people, there's a really great impact report on the web, which we can circulate after. So very briefly, how does Lens work? There's a lot of text on this slide, so I'll just go through quite quickly. But an important part of the Lens model is that we're demand-led. So we're very much led by the interests of the funders who engage with Lens alongside the interests of the farmers who are part of the model. So we start out really by engaging organizations in a region. So organizations that have a reliance on the landscape. This might be food and drink companies, it might be local councils, it might be water companies, electricity companies, etc. Understand their issues with the landscapes and their kind of priority outcomes. So are we having issues like crop failure? Do they want carbon sequestration? Do they want flood prevention? Do they want biodiversity increases, etc.? Once we understand those needs, we then engage farmers in the region to develop a plan to meet these goals. This is typically via nature-based solutions, so cover cropping, minimum tillage, afforestation, etc. We as Lens then facilitate a trade between those funders and the farmers. So we provide the kind of contracting infrastructure, we provide guidelines on measure pricing, we provide advice on implementation to farmers, etc. And then after the measures are delivered, we then provide the kind of monitoring and reporting framework. So we send partners out on farm to take soil carbon samples, we ground truth the measures, and then we make sure we're aligned with all kind of important reporting protocols, so greenhouse gas protocol, science-based targets, etc. So in terms of the kind of unique features of Lens, or what's really helped us to achieve that scale, one key feature is the co-funding mechanism. So this is where organizations with a shared interest in the landscape might be trying to achieve different things, but those different goals are achieved through similar measures. So to take an example, a water company might want to improve water quality, whilst a food company might want to reduce their scope 3 emissions. That could both be achieved by cover cropping on farms, say. If they split the cost of that cover cropping 50-50, they both achieve their goals at half the cost. So that really enables scale with the program and also encourages different users of the landscape to talk to each other. In terms of how we're able to do that, well, with our reporting, we look beyond just climate and carbon sequestration. So you can see these impact areas on the right here. This is what every farm and funder within Lens will receive on a yearly basis. So we do report on, updated emissions factors for crops, soil carbon sequestration, etc. However, we also look at soil health, so soil organic matter, adoption of minimum tillage. We look at water in terms of nitrogen use efficiency and water usage. We look at biodiversity, so new habitat creation. And increasingly, we're looking at farmer well-being and resilience. And I'll come on to this in a second. But we've really tried to put farmers front and center of the Lens program and making sure that it works for them. As I said earlier, we also make sure we're aligned with industry standards. And this has been really key for us in terms of unlocking landscape investment, particularly from those large food and drink corporates, is, Greenhouse Gas Protocol, Science-Based Targets Initiative, making sure that any of the data that comes out of Lens can flow easily into their corporate reporting is really important. And as I say, we work with a network of on-the-ground delivery partners, so AgriCarbon and ADAS, who I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. They go out and take soil carbon samples, do habitat surveys, etc. And that allows us to set the farm's baseline and then, measure improvements year on year. This is definitely, I would say, one of the key challenges with running a program like Lens. As you well know, all of these are very, very fast moving fields, particularly in the land and agriculture space, with new guidance coming out from the Science-Based Targets Initiative. So keeping up to date with these protocols is definitely a challenge. But as I say, because we report across all those metrics, we've been able to get quite a few different organisations into Lens. So food and beverage, but also water and utility. You can see there Anglian Water, Affinity Water, local government. So Perth and Kinross Council are a funder of Lens in the Leven. And increasingly looking towards finance and insurance, where they have an interest in the landscape, for them to come in and fund on-farm measures. And as I say, we try and Lens is a framework that can be adapted to a lot of different landscapes. And, in Scotland, we've been working with the Forth Rivers Trust to make sure it's really place-based, but also hopefully Lens can be a vehicle through which finance is funneled into the Leven and Forth Rivers Trust are able to achieve their goals in the catchment. As well as the funders and farmers benefiting. And as I say, the scalability and diversity of stakeholders has enabled quite significant growth in different Lens regions. And we'd love to see this in Scotland as well. It's been kind of a rough doubling year on year in terms of the amount of money going to farmers. And important to say, this is money straight into farmers' pockets that you're seeing here. So in terms of the benefits of Lens for farmers, funding's obviously a big one. So we try and cover that to that earlier slide around covering the cost of the regen transition and de-risking the transition for farmers. We provide quite competitive payment rates of around £160 per hectare. It's quite a flexible model, so farmers can dip their toe in with kind of one measure on 1 hectare for 1 year, or they can, sign up to a raft of measures on lots of different hectares for 10 years. What we find is that usually farmers will come in quite conservatively in the first few years. We can build the trust there that they're going to get paid, that it's a reputable scheme, etc. And then they'll increase their involvement as time goes by. As I showed earlier, those metrics that we report on for funders, we also provide farm level reports for every farmer involved in Lens. And that really helps farmers to see kind of what measures are working on their land, demonstrate their resilience. We'll come on to that in a second, but really helping them iterate with their regenerative practices. And alongside that, we also have agronomy training and workshops. So we've just hired an in-house agronomist, but we've been putting on training where measures might be new to farmers in a certain region. And we're just looking in the Leven, actually, perhaps Amelia will come on to it, but we're looking to set up the Leven Catchment Collective Farmer Forum. So making sure we get the opinion of farmers as to how Lens is working for them and how we can make things better and simpler. And I would say, actually, in terms of, one of the benefits to this model is about once or twice per year, what we try and do is get everyone involved with Lens in a room together for a trade review. So at the end of, a trade cycle, we'll get in the funders. So we'll get in Diageo, Perth and Kinross Council and SSEN. We'll try and get in the supply aggregators. So that's GrainCo and Frontier. And in other regions, we get in the farmers. And everyone just has a discussion about how the process has worked for them, where we can improve. Here are a few examples of measures that have been implemented as a result of Lens funding. So I'm sure they will be familiar, but cover cropping, minimum tillage equipment, species-rich hedgerow, leaky dams, etc. So we kind of have a set list of measures that we provide to farmers, and they can choose which ones to apply for. But we also encourage around 15 to 20% of funding to go to farmer innovation measures. So this is where, we might not have a measure on our list, but a farmer wants something to get done on their land, they can submit an application. We take that to the funders, and hopefully it gets signed off. And here are just some kind words from a Lens farmer, but to that point about data being quite central in what we do, the Lens MRV assessment, which means kind of the Lens monitoring, reporting and verification assessment, has enabled farmers in the past to get preferential loan rates from their banks. And actually, we just formalized a partnership with Oxbury, who are an agricultural bank, meaning that any Lens farmer can now get preferential loan rates. In terms of where we are with Lens in Scotland then, as I say, 2025 was the first year with farmers receiving money. So in the Leven, we have 10 farms, 600 hectares, and about 120,000 going to farmers. We have SSEN, Diageo, and Perth and Kinross Council as our major funders. Forth Rivers Trust, a key partner there, as well as the SRUC. And looking to the future, we hope this year to set up a Lens in the Borders, working with Tweed Forum, building on some work funded by South of Scotland Enterprise, and also in Speyside, working with the Spey Catchment Initiative. And this is all funded via Ferns, which was mentioned at the start there, but that's been really key for us in doing these scoping studies and having the bandwidth to go and engage funders and farmers in the different regions. And I'll pass over to Amelia to go into a bit more depth on the Leven.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive into Leven Lens and how it came about, what were some of the driving factors, what was the process and some of the learnings that we've taken from it, as well as examining more in depth what that first trade looks like. Next slide, please, Tom. But first, to get into that, we have to ask the question, why did Forth Rivers Trust get involved in a Lens project to begin with? And partly that's to do with our charitable remit. So Forth Rivers Trust is a charitable organization with a remit to protect, conserve and enhance the rivers, tributaries and freshwater bodies of the Forth Catchment, which is about a 3,500 square kilometre area in the central belt of Scotland, and also contains about 25% of Scotland's population. So we as an organization always have the challenge of how do we scale up delivery of nature-based solutions and how do we deliver things that work for people, nature and businesses. It also has to do a lot with our approach. So we manage our rivers through catchment management, particularly integrated catchment management, where we're thinking about not just what's going on in the river itself and the water environment, but how land use and land factors are impacting the river and how rivers are an integrated and wider part of that entire landscape. But it also had to do with the place-based context of the Leven catchment itself. So especially in the upper Leven catchment, the rivers and tributaries that feed into Loch Leven as part of that upper catchment, if you think about the whole Leven catchment holistically, there have been decades-long challenges with diffuse pollution there that have impacted the internationally significant and multiple designated Loch Leven. So there were a lot of interested stakeholders around that already. Loch Leven itself is a case study of global importance. There's a database of fortnightly monitoring there that goes back to 1968, and that's spearheaded by UKCEH. So they've been monitoring and collecting data there since 1968. So there's a wealth of information already in place to draw from. There's also source apportionment studies that happen every 10 years there. And the data in the most recent source apportionment study pointed towards water quality challenges in that upper catchment attributable to particularly agricultural diffuse pollution. So we felt, Forth Rivers Trust and some others that I'll come on to that asked us to look into the scoping study, felt that Lens might be a mechanism that could help build multi-sector collaboration in this catchment, and that would also help to benefit ecosystems and people while also delivering potentially nature-based solutions at scale. Next slide, please, Tom. So as I start to go through the process we followed, you'll see that Lens is an iterative circle, and Tom touched on this a bit already, but once you're through the initial scoping and setup that I'll sort of talk you through, it runs on an annual cycle where you deliver a trade and then you review that process, you learn from it, you adapt it, and then the trade process begins again the next year. Forth Rivers Trust are acting as the regional operator in Leven Linz. So that means that we're the place-based organization involved in all aspects of Linz development and delivery. And we're guided very helpfully in a partnership with Three Keel and Linz Company in that. And they've got templates and guidance on what next steps are in every step of that process for us. We bring the local knowledge and context and all of those local relationships and local networks into this, and they're really key to making a mechanism like Linz work on the ground. Next slide. So our process started in 2022 when NatureScot and Scottish Enterprise approached Forth Rivers Trust because they were also keen to find out if Linz could be adapted to the Leven catchment context, particularly in that upper catchment. And they funded a scoping study that was focused largely on landscape analysis. So namely, the challenge in that scoping study for us was to map the land use challenges and the dependencies that existed in the region. Next slide, Tom. To do this, we started with a database from Scottish Enterprise of over 1,200 businesses in the region. And we narrowed that down to 6 priority types of off-takers or beneficiaries of the landscape. This is really key in Linz because it's very much about identifying who is off-taking or benefiting from the wider landscape. We then focused in specifically on food and drink supply chains in the region because that became an important focus to us. We wanted to find out who was growing what and where it was going within those supply chains. And anybody involved in this, you know, that's not a straightforward task, and it's also an ongoing process because a lot of this information is not readily available. A lot of the funders that we would talk to themselves were unable to give us straight answers on some of those supply chain traces back to source. So some of it had to come from just ongoing interviews with farmers. We did a number of interviews with farmers, not just to find out if they'd be receptive to an approach like Linz, but also really to find out how it would work within their business models and the extent to which they were currently taking up public funding. How they were using that public funding, and also find out what were the barriers and challenges to them if they weren't taking up public funding, what was preventing them to do so, and what was motivating them to do so if that was the case. So we did a number of interviews with farmers and collected a lot of useful information around that. Then we overlaid all of that with an assessment of nature-based solutions opportunities in the catchment. So we were able to use here things like SEPA databases, NatureScot databases, things like the priority areas for riparian tree planting zones, geomorphic risk buffers. We were able to use things like habitat databases and soil maps, etc. Next slide. Then once we had that picture, we were able to get, in 2023, we started a Ferns funded project to build on what we'd learned in that landscape analysis and scoping. And we really needed to then focus on stakeholder mapping and engagement. But we also needed to think about adapting Linz and the Linz mechanism to the place-based context and see if we could really establish a Linz trade in Scotland, so get one off the ground. Between September 2023 and March 2025, we undertook a theory of change process, and we collected more than 63 individual and group insights in this. We had meetings with over 15 community initiatives in the region. We collected surveys and responses. We continued to do farm visits, and we held workshops. And we also had over 50 meetings with businesses and public bodies active in the region. So really starting to put together the stakeholder relationships present and identify common overlapping interests that were there. Next slide, please. We also really dug into the technicalities of Linz. So Linz, as Tom explained, is a robust model operating across several different landscapes and addressing several different landscape challenges already. It's got a large database of measures that deliver a range of multiple outcomes, but implementing Linz in Scotland required consulting a range of stakeholders on current practices in Scotland and finding out what works and what could work better, then refining the Linz measures that existed in the database based on funder requirements, but also cross-checking that with what delivers the highest potential across a range of outcomes for biodiversity, water, soil, carbon, etc. Next slide. So that process led us to our first trade year this year, 2025, where we're working toward integrated catchment management and upscaling regenerative agriculture. And we're doing so in a holistic catchment approach. Importantly, this offers new income for farmers and land managers to support sustainable practices that improve resilience for both businesses and the environment. As Tom said before, that's about £120,000 going directly to farmers for measures this year. It's actually 11 farms, but we're still working to finalize a third funder that came on board a bit later in the process. So that 600 hectares there that we're working across delivery, that figure will increase in our final delivery numbers for the year. Next slide, please. And to dig into the numbers just a little bit more, a breakdown by funding. So we know that 16% of our funding this year is going towards measures that improve ground cover. About 64% of our funding this year is going towards measures in the sort of improving soil health category. So that includes those really important measures of reducing nutrient inputs and pesticides relevant for the context of this catchment. About 18% of the funding this year is going towards biodiversity uplift measures. And then importantly, and also my favorite, about 2% and anticipated to grow next year is going towards those sort of soft returns related to practice and culture change. So those farmer resilience and well-being categories that Tom mentioned earlier in his presentation. So 2% of funding this year is going towards farmers being demonstration farms, where they can actually share their knowledge, participate in learning networks, and showcase some of the good work that's being done on the ground. Next slide, Tom. As Tom mentioned, we're about to review the first year of Leave and Lens and improve for next year. So we have our trade review meeting with all of our delivery partners and stakeholders on the 10th of November. That's upcoming. And that just shows you how Lens is iterative and it adapts itself to challenges and circumstances. So hopefully we'll have even more learnings to come back with next year. We've also got MRV and third-party teams going on the ground in October and November, collecting soil samples and other habitat data to do baseline reports that will go to funders and farmers in the spring. And then the following spring, those first funder and farmer reports will be available. Excuse me. Next slide, Tom. So I wanted to tie Leave and Lens into our wider work in the Forth Rivers Trust and some of the opportunities and work that it's kind of caused to offshoot. And Tom mentioned the Leave and Catchment Collective, where we're trying to integrate a group of farmers to learn more about what kinds of training and skills are needed in the area, and also just to create a forum and a learning network for that group to participate in. And that also includes community groups that are interested in nature improvements in the area. So it's kind of, excuse me, bridging the gap between farmer groups and community initiatives that kind of have some of the same overlapping goals for nature projects in the region. So we're doing a lot of projects that look into farmer clusters, but not just establishing farmer clusters. We're also interested in examining what structures and governance conditions these clusters succeed best in, as well as what types of funding, in the absence of public funding for farm clusters in Scotland, can fill those gaps. So we'd also like to find out, how do you integrate multiple land use types into clusters? So in catchments where, particularly upland catchments, excuse me. Apologies, I woke up with a cold this morning, so sorry for that. Particularly in catchments where there might be forestry or peatland restoration opportunities, not just agricultural land use. Is it possible to have multi-use land manager clusters, and what does that look like? We've also been doing engagement events like the one pictured above. We hosted Nature Scots with our partners Frontier, and that's them examining implementation of wild birdseed margins on a demonstration farm. And we've been sharing learnings like this webinar, and like pictured above, where we hosted an international climate delegation to discuss the Lens model and to do a farmer visit to a farmer participating in Leave and Lens. And last but not least, I wanted to leave by bringing Forth Rivers Trust's involvement in LINS back to the context of the role of private finance in upscaling nature restoration and some of our experience with this. So I could give an entire presentation unpacking this slide itself, and I have, but for today, I'll just leave a summarized version. So at Forth Rivers Trust, LINS fits into a longer-term strategy to grow private funding into nature through cost-benefit funding. So just to be clear here, I mean where businesses are funding to manage their risks or meet reporting requirements. FRT have had increasing success in the last few years at securing cost-benefit funding into nature. And we feel this offers an opportunity in the longer term to work towards impact investment and a more holistic finance model for landscapes where, over time, and already as demonstrated a bit in our experience with the more mature LINS mechanism, in more mature cost-benefit markets, funding shifts from solely outcome and data-driven to process-driven. So considering more of those things like farmer resilience and farmer well-being, and funding that supports practice and culture change. So ultimately, this shift from outcome and data-driven to more of a process-driven funding is ultimately what will lead to long-term and sustainable practice change and transformative change. Thank you.
Amelia, thank you so much. Tom, thank you so much. What a fascinating story. And Amelia, well done for keeping going through the cold symptoms just coming out there.
Sorry, Hannah. We have one final slide, a couple more slides to go, if that's all right.
Yes, of course. Sorry.
Sure. No worries. Just a vision, I guess, of what LENS and also similar models could achieve if they're scaled up over Scotland. I know there's lots of people trying to do very similar things, and I think, as I say, we're trying to get a LENS off the ground in the Borders and in Speyside. And if these models are successful, I think it's useful to look to the LENS in the east of England and what they've achieved there in terms of, this is our first year in the Leven, but the east of England's been operating for 4 years. And now it's grown to quite significant scale. So there's about 110 farms involved, around 15,000 hectares, and considerable amount of money going to farmers per year, between 3 and 4 million for a wide variety of measures beyond just carbon. So natural flood mitigation, water pollution, biodiversity, habitat, etc. And to that point around collaboration, we've got, around 2 funders per farm. So we've really had success there in terms of finding that overlap in interest. And it would be great to see something replicated through LENS and similar vehicles in Scotland, and to get to this kind of level of landscape investment, which is quite a nice point to leave it on, I think. Back to you, Hannah, and thanks again for your time, everyone.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tom. Sorry for leaping in there a bit prematurely. So listen, everyone, do use the Q&A function, and thanks to Peter and Louise and Helen for your questions that came to you as the conversation was ongoing. So I'm going to leap straight into them. With quite a technical question from Peter Phillips. How does the LENS model include assessment of additionality? So how does the model ensure there's no double funding of activities or outcomes, and that public payments doesn't go to one project twice? And just a reminder that you can upvote other people's questions if you think that their subject is the same as yours, with the little arrow that points upwards.
Sure.
So Tom, probably you go first at that one.
Yeah, so that comes in at the measure design stage. So what we do at that measure design stage is take into account all public finance streams that are available, and make sure the measures that LENS are implementing go above and beyond. So it's all additional, to a higher standard than the public finance schemes, or not offered via public finance schemes. And then in terms of other private finance streams, so as you say, if you're selling carbon credits, etc., that's handled through both the contracting and the monitoring and reporting aspect of LENS. So, the the farmers, it's 1-year measures for the most part. We have some 3 and 5 and 10-year measures. So farmers aren't committed for the long term in lots of circumstances. But by engaging in Lens, they're not allowed to then go and sell credits on the open market, etc., until the contract with Lens runs out. I think one thing I didn't quite get across in my presentation is that we're not selling credits, and that's quite a key strength of Lens. It's within supply chain mitigation. So it's, to take an example, it's Diageo improving practices on farms within their supply chain and thereby reducing their scope 3. It's not an airline buying up a forest unrelated to their operations. Slightly tangential, but yeah, it's handled through the contracting process and the measure design as well.
So it's you're aggregating ecosystem services for payments effectively, rather than putting activities into credit schemes.
Yeah, so we pay it's paid it's intervention-based payment rather than outcome-based payment. So the funders in Lens will be paying a farmer to implement, say, cover cropping or minimum tillage, and then any of the benefits from that practice are then attributed to the company. What we're not doing is generating a ton of carbon first and then going out and seeing who wants to buy it. And that's quite a key distinction in terms of sharing that risk, because if you're doing measure-based payment, if the cover crop fails, etc., if the measure doesn't work, the risk sits with the funder rather than on the farmer. Whereas if they're trying to generate a ton of carbon and it fails, they bear all that risk.
Great, thank you. And a kind of slightly related to the measurements discussion we were just having there from Louise, in terms of measurement selection, how do you balance trade-offs between outcomes that you want to see? So, for example, measures addressing the sources of pollution versus those more focused on trapping and receiving that pollution, like sediment traps?
Yeah, so I guess that's very much guided by which funders are involved with Lens in the different regions. So to Amelia's point, they look quite different, the lenses in different parts of the world. But yeah, essentially, to take the Scotland example, we've got Diageo, who are primarily interested in, regenerative agriculture, increasing resilience, and also carbon. And so that's a big priority for them. We have the Perth and Kinross Council, who are very interested in biodiversity. And so we tailor measures towards that. So it's very much led by, who's putting money in the pot, essentially. Whereas in the east of England, we have far more water companies involved. And so a lot more funding goes to sediment traps, water specific measures, etc. Amelia, please jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to add that in our experience with the funders this year, that's very much been a back and forth discussion, which has been a nice part of the process, because we could get feedback from funders and go back and forth between them to kind of figure out what the meeting in the middle in terms of those types of measures and which measures offered the most benefits to each funder.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Helen Glass. Now, Helen, I can see what you've done here. You've got 3 questions in your wanna. So can you comment on how you measure uplift in biodiversity, and then capture and store data about that and share that data on a permission basis to enable the payments to farmers?
Sure, yeah. So in terms of measuring uplift in biodiversity, we do that in 2 ways. So we use the Cool Farm biodiversity module, and then we also have this network of on-the-ground delivery partners who go out and do, they'll do habitat surveys, etc. Via ADAS. And then capturing and storing data. So we have an in-house monitoring and reporting team who, gather all the data from the on-the-ground delivery partners, process that, etc. And then, we've got a big internal database of what measures have been implemented and the benefits that have been realized. And then sharing that data on a permission basis to enable payment to farmers. I'm not quite sure. Well, I guess farmers who engage with Lens there, as part of that, their data, we've got very stringent controls around where farm data gets to, essentially. So we follow the best practices in the Farm Data Partnership, I think, is the protocol. But we handle that kind of verification aspect. So we ask farmers to submit evidence in order to verify payments. So, it might be receipts or photos of before and after, etc. And then, the funders need to sign off on that as well. So that's kind of the chain of command, slightly garbled answer, but that's how it goes.
No, great, thank you. A popular question here from Eleanor Harris. Causing diffuse pollution's illegal. So is there an issue, do you think, with supply chains paying farmers via voluntary natural capital mechanisms such as LENS to actually do basic regulatory requirement stuff?
Amelia, go for it.
I'll jump in on this one, and unequivocally I would say no, and that was partly our interest in this whole endeavor as well, because of the way LENS operates. It sets up those potential practice change shifts. So when you get your farmers participating, all of the measures are designed and implemented from the beginning to be above and beyond. So it's almost that additionality element that was in another question. We had to ensure that all of these measures go above and beyond any sort of regulatory requirements, but also in some cases we needed to make sure they go above and beyond what's required of basic payments or public funding requirements. So we ensured that in the measure design. And then the whole point of LENS is to get farmers in on a longer term basis and make that a more sustainable transition for them to more sustainable practices. So it's getting them to a certain level and then maintaining them at that level of sustainable practice, essentially. And I don't know, Tom, if you want to say anything about the Regen Ag pathways on that.
No, I guess just to add, we speak to SEPA on these issues as well. So just to make sure we're not doing, funding anything that people shouldn't be receiving co-funding for example.
Great, thank you. Technical question from Paul Seisland. What's the separation between the MRB monitoring, reporting and verification process and LENS company managing the trade? So there's an impartiality with the MRB.
Yeah, of course. So as I say, we have the structures we have our in-house MRV team, and then we send out third parties, who we pay to go and take soil carbon samples, etc. They in themselves obviously very reputable bodies, so Agricarbon, ADAS, etc. But importantly, what we do once we've got all the results is we get it third party assured, as you would with any kind of greenhouse gas footprint if you're in a large corporate. So there's that impartial kind of eye that's cast over the final figures that come out of LENS.
Thank you. Nathan Hunt's asking how you square what you imagine are the long-term wishes of funders, so for example for increased soil health, with the flexibility for farmers just to sign a short-term contract to do, say, cover cropping for a year.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, in terms of, we generally have quite good retention of farmers within LENS. So although the contracts are on a yearly basis, we usually have around 80% year-on-year return rate. And one of our real focuses is, as you say, the benefits come when you have multiple years of these measures occurring. So it's a balance between not tying farmers in for 30, 40 years as some, carbon credit schemes do, but also achieving long-term systems change. So putting the farmers front and center who are already involved with LENS is one aspect of that. And then two, I think probably what Amelia spoke to there around trying to build the LENS community or regenerative agriculture community as part of LENS is a real key focus for keeping people involved via things such as the Leaving Catchment Collective. Amelia, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that in terms of farmer engagement.
Not at the minute, thank you.
Okay, and then just to add another question that came in earlier, again from Peter, around landowners and farmers being able to participate in existing market mechanisms like Woodland Carbon Code and Peatland Code projects Lens is obviously sort of spatially organized. So can they still participate in those projects if their area is in the Lens space?
Well, if the measure's funded through Lens, they can't. But if they've got a separate area of land on their farm, yeah, farmers get revenue elsewhere.
So it depends what is included in the contract.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to plant a forest through Lens and then also sell it via Woodland Carbon Code.
Yeah, all clear. And then Miranda's wondering whether there are any lenses currently working on areas with peatland, and what opportunities for peatland restoration do you see in the space?
Yeah, it's something me and Amelia have spoken about quite a lot. We have a pilot now going on in the Yorkshire Lens about adapting Lens to the upland context, part of which will be peatland, but also low intensity grazing, etc. So it's not a nut we've cracked yet, but definitely see the need for it, particularly in Scotland.
Yeah, great, thank you. Floris is asking what the large firms' motivations and reasons are for participating in Lens.
Yeah, so I guess there's probably three big categories of organisation that are involved so far. So with the food and drink and agricultural supply chain companies, I think probably started out being more of a carbon target that was motivating action. But then probably as people have, and also those standards have developed, people are now getting involved more from the nature angle and also the resilience angle. But it very much depends where the company themselves are on that whole sustainability journey, in the sense I think it starts, as I say, starts carbon, then nature, resilience, etc. So that would be the food and drink organizations. In terms of water and utility, I think it's a matter of water quality, water availability, flood mitigation, etc. What you'd expect, really.
Yeah.
And then local councils. So as I say, in Scotland, Perth and Kinross is biodiversity. I think a lot of the motivation down in England comes from regional resilience and also kind of unlocking the private money into the landscape. Yeah, and then we're doing some quite interesting stuff. So in Wales now, it's obviously a different situation with land access down there, but looking at paying farmers for access to nice natural spaces, for example, via a footpath. And so that kind of more softer community access part of things, something we're trying to bring into Lens. Amelia, I don't know if that's covered it from the Scotland conversations.
Yeah, I think so, Tom.
All right, I'm going to try and get through as many questions as we can, but I think there probably will be too many for us to cover within the hour. So apologies for everyone whose questions we don't get to. We will send an email round afterwards with the questions that Amelia and Tom will put their brains to afterwards. A couple of related questions that I think we can probably cover off. Has there been any experience of applying the Lens model with barley growers who are also going for gold standard certification? And also, has there been any experience of Lens models with agri co-ops?
So in terms of gold standard certification, I've actually not come across that before. I have to confess my ignorance. So I can't answer that unless you can, Amelia.
We've got some, obviously barley growers in our Lens farmers this year, but it's not something they would have disclosed as part of that application process or discussion. So I'm not sure, to be honest.
All right, one for follow-up at a later stage. Thanks for that question, Jamie, and Helen's question on the agri co-ops as well.
On the co-op side of things, definitely. So down in the east of England, we have some farmer co-ops involved. So I can share more on how that's worked if that's of interest.
Great, thank you. Yeah. And question from Ben. Are there options for participation in Lens from non-farmer landowners? So landowners like Scottish Wildlife Trust reserves, RSPB reserves, for example.
Yeah. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
Amelia, you go.
Well, yeah, I can just say that we've had discussions with some of those types of land managers in our first trade, and that option's always open, and feel free to get in touch. We can come and look at that specific case for you if you're interested.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And then, sorry, I'm just juggling through the questions. It's these new ones at the top. Phoebe, thanks for your question. Do you think Lens is limited at all by not engaging in the generation of credits, given that there might be corporate demand for them, and that credits allow corporates to demonstrate their kind of in supply chain mitigations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a balance for us, and as I say, there's lots of models doing different things. I don't think we see ourselves as like a panacea for every organization's environmental goals. I think we see a real benefit in not generating credits, in that it's obviously quite a fraught world in terms of traceability and in terms of claims that are made there. And in terms of achieving, I guess our theory of change in terms of achieving systems changes, it is for the organizations involved with Lens, the big food companies, etc., to be funding measures within their supply chain and changing practices that directly relate to their operations. So yeah, I think there's plenty of people generating credits, and the niche we're trying to carve for ourselves has worked so far.
Yeah, I think a benefit really is in that breadth of different business models and different trading models. All right, I'm going to draw a close to answering questions now, so that Sally can just update us on the rest of the recipes for recovery series and bring us to a close on time. So Sally, over to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I was actually just going to, I can't share my screen, so thank you so much. Julia, I might hand over to Julia if you want to round us up for the next kind of bits and pieces for this series.
Yeah, can everybody see the screen share then?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So as Hannah mentioned at the very beginning of the talk, this is the first in kind of a three-part series that we've pulled together for you this fall. So following on this, on the 14th of November, Amelia has offered to take us out on a site visit to Balgony Farm. So this is one of their demonstrator projects within the Leven Lens catchment. So that's scheduled for the 14th of November. And then on the 20th of November, we're going to switch gears a little bit and move from the agricultural landscape to the rainforest. And so this is another Ferns project, Ferns-funded project that has been exploring how natural capital finance can help to save Scotland's rainforests. So it's about kind of some of the nitty-gritty details around contracting mechanisms to be able to scale up recovery in that landscape. And so both links will be posted in the chat. I think Sally's on that right now. We also, as Hannah showed you at the beginning, we have a landing page on the Scottish Forum for Natural Capital, which captures all three of these. We will post links to the videos, any follow-up Q&A or anything like that happens. That will be kind of the repository for information for that. And then also on that website, you can find the links to sign up for these ones that are coming up. Based on registration so far, it looks like a lot of folks have signed up for all of them at once when they went on. So thank you all for already signing up for November 20th. If you haven't already, please go ahead and do so. It should be another really interesting discussion. So I just want to just throw in a thank you to Tom and Amelia today for coming and talking about Lens. I think it's a really interesting project, and I hope that everybody feels like they've come away today learning something new. So thank you very much. And thanks to everybody for joining the webinar to have lunch with us today.
Thank you so much all.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.